Saving America one entrepreneur at a time. It's the Biz Wrap Podcast with your host, Michael Manahan.
It's Biz Wrap Radio, the show that celebrates entrepreneurs and small business with your host, small businessman, educator, and author, Michael Manahan.
And welcome to another edition of Biz Wrap Radio with your host, Michael Manahan. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are new to Biz Wrap Radio, we are the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. Yes, we're here fighting the good fight for the small business people of America, the entrepreneurs of America. And, so there's some facts about entrepreneurs you may not know, and small business in particular. Most people in the United States of America actually work for a small business. Now, I know that our government and Wall Street and some of the big corporations would like you to think otherwise, that everybody's working for General Motors or Hewlett-Packard or Facebook, but that's really not true. Most people in America are working for a small business, and as we pulled out of the recession, it was small business that created most of the new jobs. Yeah, that's right. It wasn't the big corporations. In fact, the big corporations just, if you look at the Wall Street Journal or you watch, any of the business news channels, you can see the big corporations, they're famous for cutting jobs, laying off people, and it's not like a small business where the owner's sitting in the back room wringing his hands and saying, oh my gosh, we've got to let Bob go, or we've got to let Sally go because, business is down. They just sit in the boardroom and the CEO says, okay, cut 10,000 people, cut 12,000 people. I just like this hatchet comes down like the guillotine in the French Revolution, and with very little thought. The CEO says, what? My bonus is only going to be $30 million this year? You better cut 20 million or 20,000 people off the payroll. It's just ludicrous. And yet what happens? The economy starts to falter. What's our government doing? Running around handing out money, tax breaks, tax-free loans, and everything you can imagine to all of the big corporations, of course, who can pay those lobbyists to sit in Washington and convince the politicians that it's in their best interests to do so. Meanwhile, the poor small businesses and the entrepreneurs of America are really left high on the vine. So I'm here helping the small businesses of America and entrepreneurs fight the good fight. We're fighting regulations. We're fighting the fact that the government has done everything possible to curtail capital creation, so it's harder and harder for small businesses to generate the money they need to actually be in business. When was the last time you heard of the banks giving a small business a loan? Basically the banks will only loan money now to people who don't need it. Oh, well, if you need money for your business, we'll give you a credit card with a $50,000 limit. 25% interest. Now, how can you survive on that? So we're here helping small business. Every week we bring to you interesting people who can help you as a small business person. Sometimes it's experts on business strategy, marketing, communications, issues with employees, access to capital, and of course from time to time we have entrepreneurs on the show as well. Some entrepreneurs who have been success stories and they've already made their money. They've got tips and ideas on what you can do as an entrepreneur to make your business more successful. And then from time to time we have people who are just starting out as entrepreneurs and they're getting ready to launch a business or in the process of launching a business. And they're looking for money and looking for ideas and help in getting their business off the ground. And today, that's exactly what we have. Our guest is Peter Soutowood. Peter is an architect who has now decided to jump ship from being an architect and actually open up a brew pub. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So so let's talk a little bit about your brew pub. The name of it is Four Penny. Is this still at the formulating stages, or do you actually have a location? Tell us a little bit more about the business and what you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Well, we're pretty far along with the business. We've got our space already. It's in downtown La Mesa, which is just about 10 minutes east of San Diego. And we are looking to be open about March or April of next year. So we're trying to wrap up our fundraising stage, getting through design and starting to formulate our recipes, things like that. But we're really expanding the brand. As an architect, I think a lot about space. That's my expertise. And so for me, Four Penny House, the brew pub is really just the first start of that. It's getting people in the door and to experience a space that's just magical, the way a public house is supposed to be.
Wow,
so right now
cool.
Like I said, we're just getting through design and hoping to be open early 2017.
Okay, that's great. So now you are going to actually brew your own beer on the premises.
Right. So it's nice, actually. California is starting to slowly, creakily move away from all our prohibition laws, and one of the new liquor licenses that ABC is providing is the brew pub license, which is really great for, I think, startup businesses and brew pubs, because you get to brew on site. You get a full liquor license, which is right now just about impossible to get unless you buy it at auction, and have food produced all on site. So it's really a great license, and it's going to really work well for us when we are starting out our brand and building that cult following for our beers.
Well, that's something I want to talk a little bit about because, I rail from time to time about government rules and regulations, and I've traveled a lot in Europe, and I remember being in Prague, which is in the Czech Republic, and they've got a little stand on the street, like a little street vendor who's selling sausages or wieners or whatever you want to call them, the bratwurst and so on. And, of course, that sort of stuff over in Europe is absolutely delicious. It's not like our hot dogs here that we buy that are who knows what's even in them. And, I went over to the little stand, and, he had a selection of 4 or 5 different kinds of sausages. And I ordered a sausage. I got a sausage. It was in a bun, with a little mustard and what have you. Very, very, very delicious. And then he said, well, do you want a beer? I said, what? He says, yeah, do you want a beer? And then I looked around me, and people were actually sitting on the curb eating their hot dog or bratwurst and drinking a beer. And I thought, my God, if this was in California, the police would be rounding you up and putting you in the paddy wagon and taking you off to the clink. I mean, how civilized that you could actually sit on the curb, have your hot dog and a beer. But we have such restrictive liquor laws here. So tell us a little bit about the process. How long did it take to get this liquor license for the brew pub, and how much did it cost?
So since we're still in design right now, once we have to be through with design and completely through with our funding before we can even apply for our license.
Oh, wow.
My understanding, talking to a lot of other folks who have gone through the license process, I'm expecting it's going to be about 6 months, really, stem to stern. And you're going through 2 different entities. One is the TTB, and one is the ABC. So ABC is Alcoholic Beverage Control here in California, and TTB is federal. So if you're producing alcohol, you're really jumping through a lot of hoops to get that license. The brewpub license is an interesting one. So normally if you're going to be a restaurant and you're just selling beer and wine, something like that, you can get, I believe it's a type 40 or 41 license, which is beer and wine on-site sales. That one's about $1,000 a year. So relatively cheap, and a lot of places can get this. But you don't get the spirits.
That's not
so
too
you don't
bad.
Get the hard alcohol.
Okay. So what if you want to serve hard alcohol?
So if you want to serve hard alcohol, so that's a tricky one, and honestly, with hard alcohol, it's like I said, we're kind of stuck in prohibition, and there's been a real moratorium on releasing new licenses. So ABC right now, here in San Diego County at least, does not have any full liquor licenses available for sale. So what you have to do is go to auction, and at auction, every restaurant that had a full liquor license that is closing down, you can bid for it. But the last I've heard, people are paying anywhere from $75,000 to $95,000 for a full liquor license, which is crazy for a startup business.
That is just incredible, and I don't expect you to be an expert on the Alcohol Control Board, but it seems to me our population is increasing, so is there no provision these guys have that, hey, an increasing population means you need more restaurants, and if you have more restaurants, you have more places that need to serve alcohol? Does that not occur to them?
Well, you think it would. So they actually just released in mid-September, they're doing a lottery for a couple more liquor licenses, which is apparently pretty unheard of. I mean, this hasn't happened in a long time in San Diego County that new licenses are available, but people are going to be snapping these up like crazy. So, again, the application fee on that was pretty low, but they were looking, I think, for $10,000 or $15,000 in escrow just to show that you could get the license, so they would not have speculators basically buying them up and reselling them. But the brew pub license is about $10,000 or $12,000. I'm sorry, which I think is reasonable for a startup. And again, you get that full liquor, and you can brew beer, and you can serve food. So it's really an all-in-one, just fantastic deal, I think, for new businesses.
Okay, it's Mike Manahan, Biz Rap Radio. I'm talking to Peter Soutowood, Four Penny House new brew pub coming in La Mesa. We're going to talk more with Peter right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thank you so much for listening to us today. If you're just joining us on the show, we are talking to Peter Soutowood. Peter is an architect who is now venturing into the brew pub business. He is opening up Four Penny House, a brew pub restaurant down in La Mesa, California. And Peter, once again, thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Peter, we talked a little bit about in the last segment about liquor licenses and how the California, I guess, and the Alcohol Control Board are becoming a little easier to deal with for brew pubs and places like that. But you were talking about the hard liquor license, and still you have to buy at auction, very costly. But okay, so you get the liquor license now. So what is really involved in brewing your own beer? I mean, do you have to hire some guy who's an expert at I guess what do you call it, a brewer? Do you have to have how do you get that expertise?
Yeah, so luckily, I mean, San Diego's really turning into a mega center for brewing, and UCSD has an extension program which teaches brewing sciences, and it's got some of the top names in the field teaching. So there is every year coming out of that grads who have worked on large systems, who understand the chemistry and biology behind it, and the details and logistics of production and marketing, things like that. So it's nice. We've kind of got a pipeline, a beer pipeline, running right out of the school here and into new breweries and brew pubs that are opening up. From my end, I've been baking and brewing for years, so I have a handle on really the flavor profile that I want and the story that I want, and I certainly understand the process. But stepping up from 3 to 5 gallons to 500 gallons or more is a big task. And so, yeah, you want to bring on someone who understands just the machinery, working that and the process and sanitation, using all the equipment and hoses and things like that to make sure that your product is as good as what you've done in small batches and really envisioned.
Wow, that's neat. And I never realized that there was an official university program you could go to actually learn that sort of stuff. So that might be something that's interesting for anybody out there who's listening to us today. Hey, if you're looking for a career and you're thinking about going back to university, go back to university and become a brewer. How fun could that be?
Sure.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay, so you're going to do the beer thing, but you also mentioned that you're a baker. Now, is that going to be featured in the restaurant as well?
Yeah, and really our core is beer, bread, and spirits, which are 3 things I really enjoy, and I think a lot of people do too. So one of the things that we're going to feature is a spent grain bread. So basically, after you brew, you've got all this barley or maybe some wheat and other grains in there that have gone through the process, but still have a little sweetness and texture to them. And right now with brewing operations, they just give them to agriculture. So they either go compost or they go as cattle or pig feed. So I take some of that grain and actually use it to put in bread and give it a little texture and a little nuttiness. And so we'll be baking that on site. We'll have a wood-fired oven, and we'll be making all our baked goods from scratch, whether it's breads, pizzas, scones, Scottish shortbread, which is an old family recipe of mine. So I think people really appreciate that. And honestly, it's funny, like moths to candlelight, whenever I bake and people can smell fresh bread, it is just the most appealing thing.
That reminds me when I grew up, my mother made homemade bread. And she'd make it once a week, and I remember the day distinctly that she would make it, because we'd get up for school. She'd be busy, mixing and making the bread, and you could have this kind of the smell of yeast in the house. And then by the time we got home from school, that fresh bread was coming out of the oven. And my brother and I, we could sit down, and the two of us, we could devour one whole loaf of fresh bread, usually slobbed with tons of butter. And it just brings back such great memories. And that wonderful smell of fresh baked bread is just tremendous also.
Oh, yeah. And for me, really, the story that you tell is about the communion and sharing that food together. And so, honestly, if we just had the beer and the bread, I think we'd be packed. But we want to have, you want to have a salad too, maybe feel virtuous, have something a little bit more than bread in your stomach. But honestly, I think it's going to be one of our best sellers is just bread and butter. I mean, we'll throw it and toast it up in the wood-fired oven a bit, and you just can't be beat.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, that's great. So now you mentioned you have a location picked out. What kind of size are you looking at for the restaurant?
So I've got a lease signed. We're in our space already. It's about 2,200 square feet. So usually with restaurants, you want to have about a third for the back of house, kitchen, and all your operations, things like that. For our space, it's a little different because we're doing some of the prep up front with a wood-fired oven, and we also want to have some of the fermenters, the big stainless steel tanks, a little bit closer to the front of house so people can see them and kind of understand, hey, your beer is coming right from there, right through the line, out the tap, and into your glass. So with 2,200 square feet, that'll get us about 60 to 70 seats, which is a pretty good size. It's manageable for me and my staff, and I think is going to be comfortable and not be overwhelming in terms both of management from a business standpoint, and when you're there, you don't want to feel like you're in a gigantic beer garden. Although that's a different feel, we're looking for something a little more cozy.
Yeah, now that sounds great. It sounds absolutely wonderful. This trend of these brewery restaurants is just, it's taking off like wildfire. And here in Long Beach, California, where my studio is located, the Sculpin Brewery just took over an old restaurant that had been around for years and years and years, and it was a terrible restaurant. How they survived, I have absolutely no idea. But Sculpin took it over, turned it into a brew pub. Their beer selection is great. Their food, unfortunately, is not quite so good, and the service is a little questionable because they basically don't have servers. You kind of have to stand in line. But the place is absolutely packed. I'm talking wall-to-wall people. It is just unbelievable how busy it is. And I was over there, it was like a Monday night or something. Now, Mondays, you typically think, well, restaurant's not so busy on a Monday night. The place was packed. Could barely find a place to sit. So I think you've really hit on something that is popular. And it for brew pubs to be popular, I think that it has to reflect somehow on changing tastes with the American palate. Do you know anything about that? Have you done any research on that? Or is there any information out there on that? Because, it seems to me that the day of Budweiser and Coors Light may be on the decline.
Yeah, and certainly that's happening, and a lot of people have done studies to show that, if you're used to that kind of light beer, you can crack into more complex and well-made beers. I mean, it's happening right across the border from us in Mexico right now because they've got a very strong and old tradition of just brewing, frankly, very German beers, which is interesting, but light lagers, things like that, and craft breweries are taking off there because once people get a sip of something, it's their intro to a whole new world of flavor. And For Four Penny, for our brand, I kind of equate it with where coffee houses were 20 years ago. I mean, I think people would go over to Europe and say, oh, the coffee house tradition, it feels great, and you could sit there and talk, and it really wasn't about the flavor and the food. And so I see for us, as passionate as I am about the best quality food and the beer and making sure the flavors are right, I also think we're really in the experience business.
Wow, that's great.
And it's something right now that I'm seeing is just not here, is that kind of traditional Scottish pub, like a public house, where you can have, you know, teenagers there, and you can have 20-somethings there, you can have a group of 80-year-old women there, and they can all fit in the same space. It's not too loud. There aren't a ton of TVs. And so I think the experience is part of, like you said, that changing taste. I think people are getting a taste as they travel abroad of a public house as it used to be, and kind of as it's meant to be. I mean, a lot of people don't want to go to a noisy sports bar. They want to sit and have a beer by the fire. So that's what we really want to provide.
And I think that's just a fabulous idea. Look, we are coming up for commercial break, and I do want you to have the opportunity to give out your contact information, but we'll do that after the break. I am talking with architect and now brew pub entrepreneur Peter Soutowood, opening up Four Penny House down in La Mesa, California. This is, of course, Mike Manahan, Biz Rap Radio, and we're going to be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. Thanks for sticking with us today. I am your host, Michael Manahan, and we are talking today with Peter Soutowood. He is an entrepreneur, former architect, maybe still an architect. I don't know if you can be a former architect. It's like it's once an accountant, always an accountant. But he is opening up Four Penny Public House, which is a brew pub restaurant, La Mesa, California. Again, Peter, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, this is fun. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so now if we can talk a little bit maybe about fundraising. I know you're trying to raise money. You have raised some money. You're trying to raise some more money to get your project off the ground. I know a lot of entrepreneurs who are listening to the show today struggle with this whole fundraising process. It's complex. It's tricky. There's so many pieces to it. So talk to us a little bit about what you're trying to do with your fundraising, and maybe a little bit about the experiences you've had in trying to raise money so far.
Sure. Well, first of all, I will say that I think fundraising for each business is like falling in love. It happens differently for every single person. So there's no formula I think that really works, but there are some tools that I didn't know about that have really helped me out. So I've done a bunch of different things for fundraising. Gone to friends and family, done some straight equity selling that way, and that works if you've got a great network and maybe that really rich uncle who wants to plunk down $100,000. That would be great. But I've gotten some money that way. One thing I found though that has been really successful that another startup company turned me on to is convertible notes. So basically, what this is you give people a fairly short turnaround, and in my case, I'm doing an 18-month term. So what they're doing is they're not buying equity in the company, they're lending the company money for 18 months, and what you're giving them in return is a fixed annual percentage yield. In my case, I'm offering 10%, which is pretty good yield, and honestly, that's beating what my 401k was doing for a while. So it's a good yield for folks. You know, I mean, I've had people ask, what's the guarantee? And I say, hey, there's no more guarantee in this than there is in any other investment. But it's good for me because it helps get the business open and off the ground. And honestly, once your business is open, getting that capital when you have profit and loss statements you can show and you can show your revenue is so much easier. So in talking with other business people, I found that this term is long enough that it'll really get me through construction, get me through a full year of open, and at that point I can, if people want to cash out of their investment or their loan, they can. And I can refinance and buy them out and get a lower rate than 10%. What makes it convertible, though, is that people can actually switch it over to equity. So I'm thinking that we're going to be killing it from the first day we open. And that's based on my experience and talking with people and building up this fan base. So after a year, our business might be the most happening place in La Mesa or in East County here in San Diego. And so if that's the case, we may have some of those folks who did convertible notes actually say, okay, I'm going to let my money ride on this. And so then they buy into equity and they get some of the profit sharing. So it's kind of a win-win. I really like this investment vehicle, and that's how I'm trying to kind of close out the rest of my capital raise right now.
Yeah, that's actually a great strategy. Convertible notes are there's a whole plethora, if you will, of advantages to convertible notes. One is it's a debt obligation, and debt obligations do typically carry interest and also have repayment terms. So for the person who doesn't want to put his money into a company that's kind of a black hole, never gets it back, there is an obligation to pay interest and return the money at some point in time. So there still is risk, but if you're just buying stock in a company, there is no obligation on the company to ever give you any return or pay you back. But with a convertible note, you can do that. The second nice thing about a convertible note is you also avoid the valuation issue, which a lot of entrepreneurs find when they're trying to sell stock in their company. They want to raise $500,000, so they say, well, okay, I'll give you 20% of my company for $500,000. Well, that means your company's worth $2.5 million. And the first thing the investor says, well, I don't think your company's worth $2.5 million. It's only worth $1.5 million. So you get into this huge argument, not about whether the business is going to be successful, but about how much of the company the investor gets. So it alleviates that particular issue as well. And the final point that you did mention was that with the convertible idea is that if things go well, the investor can convert it into stock and get an ownership interest, and he can make that decision after he knows, or he or she knows, that the project is actually working. So you can go down the road a year and a half, you walk into the restaurant, it's packed to the walls, you look at the financial statements and making money like crazy. Now you can say, okay, I'll convert and take an ownership piece. So it offers so many advantages, and there's one final advantage to a convertible. There's actually some favorable tax advantages to convertibles, particularly if there's if you don't want there to be harsh tax consequences on the people you're working with. So it's a great idea. So are you actually raising money on the convertible right now?
Yeah. So I've sold at least to 4 different investors who have gone for the convertible note. I'm negotiating with a couple more who may do bigger amounts, which would be great. But yeah, I think you're right. At least for startups, when you're an unknown quantity, it's going to be almost impossible, like you said, just to do a straight stock sell or an equity sell. I mean, people they don't know what they're buying. They don't know what they're getting into, the chances of success. I mean, they may personally believe in you, but I think the bigger money investors are really numbers people. Yeah. And they want to see, a year's worth of your books and say, oh yeah, so you're busy, but you're also operating this really cleanly and efficiently, and so yeah, your profit margin is there, and okay, I'm willing to invest. So maybe for my second and third ventures under this brand, it'll be a lot easier to find those equity partners. But for now, I've kind of got to stake it on convertible notes.
Okay, so Peter, if somebody is interested in talking to you about your business, perhaps potentially investing in your business, or in some other way being associated with you, how should they contact you?
Sure. So we've got all the usual social media outlets. We have our website up. It's 4pennyhouse.com, and that's all spelled out. Same thing, we're on Facebook, we have a page, and we have a group, we're on Instagram, but all of it is just 4Penny House, all one word. One final thing about funding, I did look at crowdfunding, and if we're running short on time, we can talk about that later, but that's an interesting vehicle that may be more successful for some business types than for others.
Yeah, we've actually had some crowdfunding experts on the show, and be happy to talk a little bit more about crowdfunding. One further question: is this a sole project that you've embarked upon, or do you have partners or associates working with you on this?
So I have had some chefs help me out with it in the past. Right now, I've got a new friend and associate who is kind of the brand ambassador. His name's Khalid. He's been fantastic. But right now, I'm just the sole equity holder. I've got no other business partners, but certainly am open. Again, it's kind of like a marriage. You've got to find the right person. But if I find a business partner who really is interested in stepping up and being a part of the finances and the oversight, I'd be open to that.
Okay. Now you were an architect, and as I said, you probably still are an architect per se. But are you actively working as an architect, or have you kind of given that up and it's now full force on the restaurant project?
So I had been working full time as an architect up until this spring, and then got laid off, which happens in this business quite a lot in the construction industry. But I had been working on the restaurant project for so long and was putting in so much time already into it, I decided just to dive headfirst, which I think is probably the only way you can start up your business, is to put all your time and effort into it. But I'm still doing architecture projects on the side, and will keep up my license. I mean, it's something you have to pay for and do continuing education. But it's important to me to always be an architect. I think it gives me a good insight into people and again, space making and, project management. So it's been great. I love being an architect, but I'm also really enjoying being an entrepreneur.
That's great. And do you mind me asking how old you are?
Sure, I'm 41. So
because you're still a young guy.
I think so. And this is my third career, so I figured if I was going to start a restaurant and bar, I'd better do it while I've still got enough energy to put in those long hours. So
absolutely,
yeah.
That's great. Okay, we are coming up on commercial break. It is Mike Manahan, your host, Biz Rap Radio. We're talking to architect and now restaurant owner for Penny House, Peter Soutowood. And we're going to be back with more from Peter right after these messages, just as we head for the commercial break. And we'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thank you so much for sticking with us today. We are today speaking with Peter Soutowood. He is the owner of Four Penny Public House, which is a new brew pub restaurant opening up in La Mesa, California. We've been talking about everything from liquor licenses to the whole brew pub concept, talking about fundraising. Peter is trying to raise money for his company. We've been talking about liquor, just a ton of stuff. Very interesting. But Peter, once again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the name Four Penny. Where did that come from?
Right. So last fall, my daughter and my mother and I went to Scotland. It was my third trip. That's my family heritage, and so we were doing some genealogy and touring around. And driving around through the countryside, going to the Outer Hebrides and way up north, most of the time I was driving, but sometimes I could look at the maps and stop and take a look, and I kept seeing this town named Four Penny. It was up north of Inverness, way up in the Highlands, and the name stuck with me because a lot of Gaelic names are really kind of mouthfuls of marbles, and Arg, got Blarg, and all these really difficult, at least to my ears, not quite lilting and lovely sounding. But Four Penny had just a nice ring to it. So when I was going through naming options this spring for the brand and the restaurant, I had a bunch of different ones that just didn't roll off the tongue, and had Four Penny as an option. Went and talked to my branding company. I said, well, here's my first option. They said, okay. And I said, well, one I have in my back pocket is Four Penny House. And they said, yes, go with Four Penny. They said, because you can even drop the house and people say, oh, I'm going to go have a pint at Four Penny. And they said, it's got a ring to it. So that's where it came from, and I've been in love with the name ever since.
Well, it's a great name, and I love the fact that it's got a bit of a story to it as well. I love restaurants where there's some kind of a story. Some of my favorite restaurants, I went to a restaurant years ago where the owner of the restaurant had chosen recipes for the various dishes on the restaurant from various places that he had traveled. And while they were their usual. There were salads and chicken and fish and all the rest of the stuff. It was very interesting because with each recipe, there was a little paragraph. This was a recipe for fish that I had when I was traveling, to this particular country, and I ate at this little restaurant and blah, blah, blah. And he had a little story. I thought, how interesting. So you've got a story about your name. I think that's great. I love the idea, by the way, of this public house, if you will, kind of a neighborhood place where you can go and have a beer, or some food, maybe meet people who are in the neighborhood, in the community. And something you said really resonated with me, which is this is not a sports bar. You're not going to have 50 TVs blaring in the restaurant.
Right.
And I was very disappointed. I have a restaurant that serves great beer here in Long Beach. It's long been a place that I've gone into after work with friends and associates. And they started this thing where every time there was a football game, they put the football game through the speakers. They shut off the music and they play it super, super loud, almost so loud it's very difficult to have a conversation with your neighbor. And quite frankly, we've stopped going there anytime there's a football game on because you can't have a conversation in the place.
Right, and so as an architect, that acoustics to me are a huge, huge issue. And when I go out, I want to hear who I'm talking to. So I knew from the beginning I was not going to have any TVs in my place. And when I tell that to people, they're really happy. Surprising how many places you go and they've got 5, 6, 7 TVs blaring in it. I want people to go for the company and to enjoy the food and enjoy conversation where you don't have to yell or end up with your ears ringing at the end of the night. And our tagline is "There's a place for you at Fourpenny House," and I really want that to be true. So if you don't like a lot of noise, then okay, you can go and sit and enjoy yourself, and you can enjoy one another's company without kind of the acoustic, overwhelming sense you get in a lot of places. Because you do want to be able to sit and have a pint and enjoy yourself.
And it amazes me. I walk into bars and restaurants, bars, what have you, and there'll be 20 people sitting at the bar. They're all watching TV, or they're on their cell phones doing something on their cell phone, and nobody's engaging in a conversation. And I always thought one of the reasons you went out to a bar was actually to meet other people and talk to other people. Apparently that has changed quite a bit from what I remember.
Well, and honestly, when like I said, being in the experience brand is important, and so having a fireplace right up front, a wood-burning fireplace that kind of faces out towards the street through our big windows, and having loose seating around that, I mean, that's an experience. I mean, I could probably fit more tables and dining space in there, but I want people to come and sit by the fire, and even if they're not buying anything, that experience is so valuable that it makes our brand stronger than ever. And like I've given as an example, I think Starbucks knows this. I mean, sure, they could fit more people in their spaces, but someone who sits there all day on their laptop is not a great paying customer, but they are building the brand experience. And that's really, as an architect and space maker, that warms my heart.
Gotcha.
Those kinds of people.
So I want to ask you one more thing, and if you're not comfortable discussing this, I completely understand, but I'm sure there's somebody listening out there who's thinking, gosh, I'd like to open up my own little restaurant, maybe a brew pub restaurant. Peter mentioned he's got about 2,200 square feet. Obviously, he's got to bring in this brewing equipment, tables, chairs, restaurant equipment. What's the budget for opening a facility like you plan to open?
Sure. Our budget right now is just about $400,000. And construction is a huge part of that. So if you're opening up a restaurant, it's honestly a lot easier to go into an existing restaurant space. Even if you're going to move out the equipment and change all the finishes, at least having that utility infrastructure in place is huge. And I think that's honestly a big part of our budget because we've got just an empty space, so we're building out everything, the grease interceptors and all the larger capacity water and gas lines and HVAC equipment. So to people who are looking at going into bar or restaurant, location is key for sure, and that's why I grabbed up my space even though it wasn't a restaurant. But if you find a place that's in a good location, see if you can get an existing restaurant. I mean, move everything around and make it look completely different, but at least you've got a head start on all those utilities because that really does take time and it takes money to build out.
Yeah, that is actually really good advice. In fact, I remember years ago meeting an entrepreneur whose very business model was keeping his eye open for people who went and opened restaurants and then went bankrupt because they didn't plan properly or they were undercapitalized. He would go in, snap up the restaurant, negotiate with the landlord, basically take it over, throw a new coat of paint, maybe move the tables around a little bit and put a new name on it, and he'd be in business within weeks and didn't have that huge capital cost, not to mention the time it takes to get that restaurant ready to go.
Right. So I've certainly bit off a lot with this project, but I think ultimately it's going to be good because our location right in the village of La Mesa, right in the heart of it. It's kind of like Mayberry here. If you haven't, for those Southern California folks, I'd say come down to La Mesa and take a look because it's this cute little downtown. And so, again, location. So for me, it's worth the extra expense and time to build it out. It's a longer investment, but I think it's going to be well worth it.
Well, that's great. Look, we're coming to the end of the show. Once again, I'm speaking with owner Peter Soutowood, who is owning and opening 4 Penny House, a brew pub restaurant in La Mesa, California. Peter, once again, how can people get a hold of you if they're interested in talking to you?
Sure. So our website is 4 Penny House. It's all spelled out, 4pennyhouse.com. My email address, if you want to shoot me an email with any questions or you're interested, it's just peter@4pennyhouse.com. Check us out on Facebook. I put lots of stuff on Instagram, too, some kind of mouth-watering pictures of beer and bread, things like that. So on Instagram, we're 4 Penny House. Same thing on Twitter. So we're out there. I'd love to build up more of our fan base.
Wonderful. Check it out, 4pennyhouse.com. Peter, really, this has been so interesting, and I love all the information you've been able to give us about not only the restaurant industry, but what you're doing to raise money, which I'm sure a lot of people will find very, very helpful. Thank you so much for joining me today. Here at BizRap Radio, we believe we can fix the United States of America through a fundamental concept that individuals pursuing their own economic interests in free markets will create more prosperity for more people than can ever be achieved through government regulation and a planned economy. BizRap Radio, fixing America through individual economic freedom. That's it for this week. We'll be back again next week with another edition of BizRap Radio.